Grim morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Ross Bay Cemetery, located in Victoria, Canada. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. This week, we're delving into the chilling depths of Ross Bay Cemetery, a place where the echoes of history intertwine with the restless murmurs of the dead, and the fog itself seems to carry their secrets. Join me as we step beyond the creaking gates of this Victorian-era burial ground, perched on the edge of the Pacific Ocean in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Beneath its stately trees and weathered tombstones lies tales of triumph, tragedy, and scandal. As we descend into the past, we'll uncover the stories of those who helped shape this city, and those who still may linger among the graves. Ross Bay Cemetery owes its name to Isabella Mainville Ross, a Métis woman and a trailblazer in British Columbia's early history. Born in 1808, Isabel was of Anishinaabe and French descent, making her heritage a blend of indigenous and European cultures. Her life was emblematic of resilience, resourcefulness, and adaptability in the face of colonial challenges. Isabel married Charles Ross, a Hudson Bay Company trader who was integral to the establishment of Fort Victoria in 1843. Charles oversaw the construction of the fort, helping to lay the foundations of what would later become the city of Victoria. Tragically, he died suddenly in 1844, leaving Isabella widowed and responsible for their family in a fledgling settlement. In the 1850s, Isabella made history as the first independent female landowner in British Columbia, a remarkable achievement for a woman in colonial society, particularly one of Métis heritage. She purchased 99 acres of land overlooking what is now called Ross Bay and named it Fowl Bay Farm, inspired by the abundance of waterfowl in the area. Despite her determination and hard work, the farm was not successful, and Isabella gradually sold portions of her land to individual buyers. One of these parcels was later purchased by the city of Victoria for use as a cemetery. Isabella passed away in 1885 at the age of 77. She was buried in Ross Bay Cemetery in an unmarked grave, her life and achievements largely forgotten at the time of her death. It wasn't until 1994 that the Old Cemetery Society in Victoria installed a commemorative plaque at her grave, recognizing her contributions and preserving her place in history. Ross Bay's first burial was Marie Letitia Pierce, but she was far from the last. The cemetery now holds almost 30,000 graves, including those of Sir James Douglas, British Columbia's first governor, the celebrated artist Emily Carr, and local coal baron Robert Dunsmuir, builder of the opulent Craigieburn Castle. Yet these figures are not alone. The cemetery is also a resting place of lesser-known souls, their names and stories etched into fading stone, and the spirits who refuse to rest. Among the prominent figures buried in Ross Bay Cemetery is Sir James Douglas, a name that looms large in the history of British Columbia. Known as the father of British Columbia, Douglas was instrumental in shaping the province during its early days. Born in 1803 in Darramarma, British Guiana, to a Scottish merchant father and free woman of color, Douglas's heritage placed him at a unique crossroads of culture and social perspectives, a factor that undoubtedly influenced his progressive policies later in life. Douglas began his career with the Hudson's Bay Company, rising quickly through the ranks due to his intelligence, resourcefulness, and keen understanding of commerce and diplomacy. In 1843, he was tasked with establishing Fort Victoria on Vancouver Island, laying the foundations of what would become the City of Victoria. As governor of the colony of Vancouver Island, and later the colony of British Columbia, he oversaw some of the most pivotal moments in the province's history, including the Fraser Canyon Gold Rush of 1858. This influx of miners and fortune seekers could have spiraled into chaos, but Douglas's firm governance maintained order and prevented British Columbia from being absorbed by the United States. His leadership wasn't without controversy, however. While Douglas is remembered for his efforts to protect Indigenous land rights in the face of colonial expansion, these arguments were often undermined or ignored by settlers and the colonial government after his tenure. His legacy is thus both celebrated and critiqued, as the complexities of his era remain a subject of ongoing historical reflection. Douglas passed away in 1877, his life a testament to the challenges and triumphs of early colonial leadership. At Ross Bay Cemetery, his grave's marked by a stately stone monument, a fitting tribute to a man who helped shape the very land which he now rests. Yet even in death, his story continues to resonate, his spirit tied to the legacy of British Columbia. Some visitors claim to feel an unshakable presence near his grave, a weight of history, or perhaps the lingering aura of a man whose decisions helped shape the course of a nation. While they're drawn to his story or simply wandering through the cemetery's winding paths, those who pass his resting place can't help feel the echoes of his extraordinary life. The tale of David Fee is one of Ross Bay Cemetery's most chilling and sorrowful stories, steeped in tragedy and surrounded by whispers of political intrigue. On a stormy Christmas Eve in 1890, the streets of Victoria bustled with revelers attending midnight mass at St. Andrew's Cathedral. Among them was 28-year-old David Fee, a well-liked shopkeeper from Nanaimo, who had returned to Victoria to spend Christmas with his family. Dressed in festive attire and carrying a toy trumpet for a holiday party, Fee had no inkling of the night that would end in bloodshed. As the bells rang out and carolers filled the night with song, the festive air was ripped apart by a sudden, deafening gunshot. The sharp crack echoed through the rain-soaked streets, drawing bystanders into the chaos. There they found David Fee, his lifeless body sprawled in a growing pool of blood. The shot had torn through his chest at close range, leaving telltale powder burns on his clothing, a grim mark of his assailant's deadly proximity. Despite efforts to carry him to safety, Fee died shortly after, still dressed in his Christmas costume and clutching the trumpet intended for celebration. His death would send shockwaves throughout Victoria, casting a shadow over the holiday season and beyond. The circumstances of Fee's murder were as baffling as they were horrifying. Investigators quickly apprehended the killer, Lawrence Whelan, a 33-year-old Irish immigrant who had turned himself into the police just hours after the shooting. Whelan, visibly intoxicated, confessed to the crime, but offered a strange and contradictory defense. According to him, the shooting was an accident. He had meant to fire a warning shot after being provoked by Fee and his companion, who he had claimed had mocked him by blowing the trumpet in his face. Whelan insisted he had only intended to fight them, not kill. But his explanation didn't hold up to scrutiny. Witnesses at the scene reported that Whelan had approached Fee and his friend, Frank Partridge, with deliberate intent. Before firing, he reportedly issued a cryptic challenge, "I challenge you." The Crown argued that Fee's murder was no accident, but a case of mistaken identity tied to the Irish nationalist tensions simmering in the city. They claimed that Whelan's true target was Thomas Deasley, a foreman who had angered Irish workers by ordering the removal of a politically charged Irish nationalist flag from the construction site of the new St. Andrew's Cathedral. Fee's white coat had tragically made him a stand-in for Deasley in Whelan's drunken, misguided vendetta. Whelan was tried and convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, a verdict many, especially the presiding judge, Sir Matthew Bailey Bigby, found far too lenient. Bigby, known as the hanging judge, openly criticized the jury's decision and sentenced Whelan to life in penal servitude, warning him that he would spend his days in misery. Yet even this punishment was short-lived. Whelan was soon released after serving only 10 years, sparking outrage among those who believed Fee's life had been taken in a calculated act of violence. Fee's story doesn't end with his untimely death. He is grave marked by a striking marble pillar that still gleams as if untouched by time, has become a local focal point for those drawn to Ross Bay Cemetery's haunted past. Many visitors claim to feel an eerie presence near his resting place, or catch a glimpse of a spectral figure in a white coat, wandering around the tombstones. Others report sensing his spirit near the steps of St. Andrew's Cathedral, where the tragic events of that Christmas Eve unfolded. His ghost is said to carry an air of sorrow, as if forever replaying the moment when joy turned to horror. Fee's murder remains one of the darkest chapters in Victoria's history, a chilling reminder of how quickly a life can be snuffed out by a single act of malice, or perhaps misjudgment. A story marked by a blend of political tension, mistaken identity, and tragic end lingers in the cold, damp air of Ross Bay Cemetery, leaving visitors to ponder the mysteries of the past. But Fee is not the only restless soul. Visitors to Ross Bay often speak of a veiled woman in mourning clothes who glides silently between the graves. Could this be Isabella Ross, eternally roaming her former land? Her identity is still unknown to this day. The cemetery itself is a testament to Victorian design, with its winding carriageways, manicured plantings, and curving paths. It was meant to be a garden cemetery, a place where the living could reflect amid the beauty and tranquility. But even its serene design can't mask its darker history. During the 1930s, graves from earlier cemeteries in Victoria were exhumed and relocated to Ross Bay, including those of Indigenous people from the Saugeen's Reserve. The land where Ross Bay Cemetery now lies was once a part of the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, whose descendants included the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. Long before the European settlers arrived, the Lekwungen people lived in harmony with the land, relying on the rich resources of the coastal region for food, shelter, and spiritual practices. The bay's fertile waters and lush surroundings were central to their way of life, offering fish, shellfish, and waterfowl to sustain their community for thousands of years. With the arrival of European settlers in mid the 19th century, the Songhees people were forced to relinquish much of their land, including the area that would later become Victoria and Ross Bay Cemetery. In 1911, their reserve in Victoria's Inner Harbor was sold to make way for urban development. The deal, fraught with coercion and broken promises, displaced the Songhees people, scattering them to now reserves further from their ancestral lands. Adding to this disruption, some of the Songhees burial grounds were exhumed and moved to Ross Bay Cemetery, a decision that further severed their connection with their heritage. The graves of the Songhees people relocated to Ross Bay were placed in the Roman Catholic section of the cemetery, reflecting the influence of missionaries who had converted many of the indigenous people to Christianity. Yet even in their new resting places, the spirits of the Songhees seemed to linger, as if tethered to the lands they were once forced to leave behind. Visitors to Ross Bay have reported unexplicable sensations near these graves, shifts in temperature, whispers on the wind, and an overwhelming sense of sadness, as though the spirits mourn their displacement. The loss of the Songhees Reserve is a poignant reminder of the colonial policies that disrupted Indigenous communities across Canada. For those who walk the winding paths of Ross Bay Cemetery today, the land's deeper history is often overlooked. Beneath the manicured lawns and towering headstones lies a story far older than the cemetery itself, a story of a people who called this place home long before the transformation into a burial ground. As you gaze out over Ross Bay's windswept shoreline, imagine the voices of the Lekwungen people who once fished these waters and gathered along its shores, their spirits forever woven into the land. While the cemetery now stands as a historical landmark, its history is intertwined with the legacy of land dispossession and cultural erasure. The Lekwungen people's connection to this land remains strong, however, as their ancestral spirits continue to be honored in ceremonies and stories passed down through generations. Beneath the towering trees and moss-covered stones of Ross Bay Cemetery lies a name that echoes through the annals of British Columbia's history: Billy Barker, a man whose fortune rose and fell with the tides of the gold rush. Barker's story is one of ambition, risk, and tragedy. From the rugged wilderness of the Cariboo to his humble grave in this Victorian-era burial ground, his life and legacy remain etched in the very fabric of the Providence. Billy Barker's journey began far from the gold-rich dreams of British Columbia. Born in 1817 in the quiet village of March, Cambridgeshire, England, Barker grew up working as a waterman, navigating the waterways of his homeland. But the Industrial Revolution brought sweeping changes, and canal transport gave way to railways, leaving Barker and many others in search of a new livelihood. By the mid-19th century, he had set his sights on the promise of gold, first in California and later in British Columbia, where the whispers of riches in the untamed wilderness sparked the Fraser River and Cariboo Gold Rushes. It was in the remote valleys of the Cariboo region, along Williams Creek, that Barker would gamble everything and win. While others sought their fortunes higher up the creek, Barker's instinct led him to dig deeper, and at the depth of 52 feet, his perseverance was rewarded. The claim he and his party uncovered yielded a staggering 37,500 ounces of gold, making him one of the wealthiest men in the goldfields and earning him a place in history as a legendary prospector. The town of Barkersville, which sprang up around his claim, became the epicenter of the gold rush and stands today as a preserved relic of that fevered time. But fortune is a fickle mistress, and Barker's life soon took a tragic turn. Despite his immense wealth, he struggled to hold on to his fortune. Some accounts blame his generosity. He was known to share his riches freely with others. Others point to poor financial decisions and investments. His declining health, including symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and the stress of managing a fortune in the lawless goldfields also took their toll. By the 1870s, Barker was destitute. In his later years, Barker found himself penniless and alone, living in a nursing home in Victoria. He passed away on July 11, 1894, at the age of 77, a far cry from the celebrated prospector who had once embodied the gold rush dream. Barker was buried in Ross Bay Cemetery in an unmarked grave, his final resting place almost forgotten amid the grandeur of the more prominent figures. Although his grave remained unmarked for many years, Barker's story has endured, and his spirit is said to linger in the cemetery. Visitors to Ross Bay reported seeing a shadowy figure at dusk, a miner's pick slung over his shoulder, wandering through searching for something lost. Some claim to hear faint metallic clinking, like the sound of a pickaxe striking stone, carried on the ocean breeze. These eerie accounts suggest Barker's restless spirit is tied to his unfulfilled dreams and the fortune he lost. Beyond the ghostly tales, Barker's story is a reflection of the turbulent nature of the Gold Rush era, a time of immense opportunity but also crushing failure. His rise and fall symbolizing the extremes of human ambition and the fleeting nature of fortune. Today, Barkersville stands as a tribute to the Gold Rush and to Barker's legacy, a preserved reminder of a town he helped create. At Ross Bay Cemetery, Barker's once forgotten grave is now a site of quiet reflection, a place where visitors can ponder the life of a man who dared to dig deeper, both literally and metaphorically. His story serves as a poignant reminder of the sacrifices and struggles of those who sought to carve out a better life in the unforgiving landscape of British Columbia. Among the many eerie tales of Ross Bay Cemetery, few are as poignant as enigmatic as the story of the elderly couple who still wander its paths. On misty mornings or in the fading light of the late afternoon, listeners have reported to seeing an older man and woman strolling hand in hand throughout the cemetery's winding avenues. They appear serene, almost as if they've stepped out of another time, their presence blending seamlessly with the cemetery's Victorian-era charm. The man is often described as wearing a dark coat and hat, his posture stoic yet gentle, while the woman is clad in a flowing dress and bonnet that seem to flutter faintly even when the air is still. Witnesses say their pace is slow and deliberate, as though they're enjoying a quiet walk together, taking in the beauty of the cemetery, towering obelisks, and the mossy trees. But what makes their presence so haunting is they vanish without a sound if approached, dissolving into the damp air like figures in a half-forgotten dream. Some believe the couple's spirits are bound to the cemetery by love, a bond so strong in life that it continues even in death. Others suggest they are simply enjoying eternal peace, revisiting the past they once walked together long ago. Their calm, steady presence is often described as comforting, a reminder that not all ghosts linger out of unrest. But who are they? The cemetery holds no shortage of elderly couples buried together, their graves marked by ornate inscriptions and elaborate carvings that speak to enduring devotion. Yet no names have ever been definitively tied to these apparitions. Could they be symbolic, a reflection of the countless families and loved ones who rest here? Or do they belong to a pair whose story has been lost to time, their identities forever a mystery? The ghostly couple is a stark contrast to the darker tales of Ross Bay Cemetery. Unlike the tragic specter of David Fee or the unsettling whispers near disturbed graves, the elderly couple invokes a strange sense of peace, even joy. Their presence is a quiet reminder of the cemetery's dual nature, a place of sorrow but also love, remembrance, and perhaps even reunion. For those lucky or unlucky enough to catch a glimpse of them, the sight lingers long after they've faded into the mist. Are they an echo of a life once lived, or do they choose to remain, walking side by side through eternity? Ross Bay Cemetery's history is not without its controversies, some of which have taken on to an almost mythical quality over time. In the 1980s, the cemetery became infamous as a focal point in the Satanic Panic, a moral and social movement fueled by allegations of widespread ritual abuse tied to satanic cults. At the center of this hysteria was a book Michelle remembers, published in 1980 by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Pasder and his patient Michelle Smith, who later became his wife. The book claimed that Michelle had uncovered memories of horrifying satanic rituals during therapy sessions, memories allegedly repressed for decades. According to Pastor and Smith, some of these rituals took place in none other than Ross Bay Cemetery. The book described macabre ceremonies involving sacrifices, chanting, and unthinkable acts that they claimed were conducted within the cemetery's shadowy corners. These allegations cast an ominous shadow over Ross Bay, feeding into a larger narrative of fear and suspicion that swept across North America during this period. However, the claims made in Michelle Remembers have since been thoroughly discredited. Scholars, investigators, and journalists have demonstrated that the book relied on recovered memory therapy, a practice that has been widely criticized for planting false memories in patients. No evidence was ever found to support the allegations of satanic activity in Ross Bay Cemetery or elsewhere. Despite this, the book left an indelible mark on the public's imagination and further cemented the cemetery's reputation as a place of eerie intrigue. Even today, the legacy of Michelle Remembers lingers like a faint shadow over Ross Bay Cemetery. Some visitors claim to feel an oppressive energy in certain parts of the grounds, attributing it to the sinister rumors tied to the book. While these feelings are likely the result of the cemetery's somber atmosphere rather than anything supernatural, the association with the Satanic Panic remains a dark chapter in its history. For those who visit Ross Bay Cemetery, it's important to separate facts from fiction. The true stories of the people buried here, the triumphs, tragedies, and legacies they left behind, are far more compelling than the exaggerated claims of a debunked book. And yet, the tale of Michelle Remembers serves as a reminder of how fear and rumors can shape perceptions of a place, turning it into a vessel for collective unease. The cemetery is not just a burial ground, it's also living history, a museum of marble and moss where the past refuses to stay buried. Its rows of ornate headstones and towering pillars tell stories of wealth, power, love, and loss. From the coal barons and the politicians who helped shape British Columbia's future to the nameless souls who rest in obscurity, each grave holds a piece of the city's history. Whether you come for its beauty, its history, or its ghosts, Ross Bay Cemetery leaves an indelible mark on all who enter. But beware, after dark, the dead do not rest soundly. So, dear listeners, if you find yourself in Victoria, take a moment to wander its tree lined paths and reflect on the lives that came before. Just remember, some of them may still be watching and lingering. The grave grind for Ross Bay Cemetery was a London fog from Jackson Brothers Coffee House. For more honorary grinds in the area, please visit the-grim.com. For now, we're closing the gate on Ross Bay Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, subscribe today to join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.